Nattergal is a company, a nature restoration company that has been founded specifically to deliver nature recovery at scale, to deliver big biodiversity recovery projects. In the process, of course, generating lots of different types of ecosystem service, including biodiversity uplift, carbon sequestration, natural flood management, all these different things that we expect to generate and sell ultimately to fund that nature recovery, much of which is in the form of biodiversity net gain offsite units. So to us, biodiversity net gain is one marketplace that represents an amazing opportunity to fund large-scale nature recovery projects. And so Nattergal is a private company. We've raised a significant amount of investment, which has allowed us to buy 3 of our own sites across England now. They're all over 200 hectares. One of the things you'll see a lot of in this kind of new BNG world is relatively small sites. People are generating or doing habitat banks on a relatively small scale, a field here or a field there, whereas we're looking at entire landscapes. So where I'm sitting right now is called Boothby Wildland. It's 600 hectares, which is quite an amazing opportunity to do something at scale. And Ian asked me today to give you just a bit of an overview of how you create offsite BNG units. So if you're in the position where you're a developer and you've done your biodiversity assessment of your site, you've worked out how much you needed to do on site, and you're left with that residual offsite demand, well, BioUnits are the person who can help you find them, and we're the people who can generate them for you. And so that kind of generation is what I'm going to talk about. I do have a couple of slides to introduce Nattergal, which we can probably breeze over, having done the intro there, Ian. But if you just hop on to the next one. Yeah, I guess one of the things that makes us slightly different is that we are looking to lock our land up for nature for the rest of time. BNG requires 30-year legal agreements. So wherever you buy BNG from, it has to be secured, legally secured for a minimum of 30 years. One of the things we're doing, because we own our own land and they're our own projects, we are looking at covenanting that land in perpetuity, 100 years at the very least, meaning that if we go out of business or we sell the company and go public, that land is covenanted and protected beyond the life of that BNG initial hit. So we call that permanence. And the other thing we're doing is working with lots and lots of people. So as I mentioned briefly in the introduction, BNG is just one potential market mechanism for us to restore these really big sites. The BNG market just isn't big enough yet to fund, well, we hope it will be, but it might not be big enough to fund the sizes of projects that we're talking about. And so we're looking at the carbon sequestration value of what we're doing, natural flood management, all these different things. And to do that, to properly understand it and to be able to sell it, we're working with academia and local partners across the board. And one of those partners would be BioUnits UK, of course, as a kind of commercial partner, and how we can take this to market. And then finally, that unusually spelt word there, NEP, is our inspiration. So our founder, Nattergal's founder, is a private landowner who rewilded his estate in Sussex starting in the year 2000. And it has become probably the best known rewilding project, certainly in Britain, maybe in Northern Europe. And what has happened, if Ian goes on to the next slide, is the most kind of extraordinary biodiversity recovery. You just have to click through. I think there are a load of
I can hear all
transitional slides. Yeah, you got the Dawn chorus singing in the background. If you just do it until there are 4 abreast across the screen, Ian, I think that's where you want to be. What's happened in the last 20 years is the most extraordinary biodiversity recovery. And the temptation with net gain, and I know for a lot of people on here, net gain is probably a bit of a hassle and a bit of an inconvenience, but even the nature-led or nature-minded people in this world can reduce this whole conversation to units and prices and multipliers. And it's important to remember what we're actually trying to do is deliver a net gain of life, a net gain of biodiversity. And so we are in the fortunate position at Nattergal to have 25 years of experience from NEP to then apply that thinking and learning to our biodiversity recovery site. So all of those cool stats on the screen there just give you a little indication of the type of nature we're delivering. We'll measure it using habitat, which is how you trade BNG, but it's really the spiders, the soil fungi, the birds, the butterflies. And I always like to just remind everyone it is about nature, this ultimately about a net gain in it. Next slide, please, Ian. Next one again, sorry. So at the moment we have 3 sites. Boothby Wildland is where I'm sitting right now. We're about to go out and look at where our beavers and our river restoration is taking place, generating lots of lovely watercourse units and seeing all of our amazing kind of natural colonization of scrub and grasslands. And then we also have a site in Norfolk and we have a site in Essex. So it gives you an idea of scale that 600 hectares, 300 hectares, 200 hectares, these are really quite big sites generating a lot of potential units. Next slide, please, Ian. So the question is then, that scene on the left, which is what Boothby is today, it's grade 3 poor quality arable land with very, very little natural habitats found on it. We want to take it from that farm to that wildland over the next 30 years. So that transition, how do we capture that? How do we understand that and turn those into ultimately habitat units that people can buy from us and therefore fund the nature recovery and in the case of BNG offset whatever negative their impact where they're having their development. Next slide, please, Ian. So the first thing you need to do, I've got 2 timelines because there's a sort of on-site one and then there's a legislative one that runs simultaneously. And so the first thing you need to do as an off-site habitat provider or habitat banker is understand your baseline. So that previous slide was an arable farm. What we do is we send out our ecologist, Rachel, or one of our ecologists, and they walk every inch of the land and they tell you what type of habitats you have and where. And crucially, each of those habitats then receive a kind of Natural England defined condition score. And that condition score is really important for BNG because sometimes improving condition in one particular habitat can produce lots of units that can then be sold. And that is your baseline. So for Boothby here, it's about 90% arable, which is a very low biodiversity value, and then some grasslands and woodlands around the edges. Once you have that baseline, you can start thinking about the next phase. So that's the next point, please, Ian. And that's designing your habitat management plan, which is a kind of crucial piece of documentation that you will need to secure those units legally. So I'll come on to the legal side of things. For these units to be considered real and well thought through, that habitat management plan needs to be ultimately designed by a qualified ecologist. And so our ecology team, led by me, is thinking about, okay, how can we deliver what's best for biodiversity here? So the second point there is we're doing what's best for nature, not to maximize units. Now that there is a bit of gaming you can do, which is basically turn everything into other neutral grassland in moderate condition, and you're going to generate more units than you know what to do with. The best thing for nature, of course, is to have a mosaic of different habitats. You know, that's woodland and scrubland and ponds and grassland and lowland meadow and all of these different things, because nature is messy and likes a mosaic effect. And obviously you need to think through what your soil types are and et cetera, et cetera. So that second phase, designing the habitat management plan, could take a year in our case, you know, so you're really thinking deeply about what's going on. And then your ecologist fills out your dephrometric calculation, which spits out the number of uplift units you're going to be creating and therefore selling. Next bit, please, Ian. And then you start the habitat banking, which is actually the creation of new habitats, the creation of new conditions for biodiversity to thrive in. I've got a couple of pictures of that in a second. So whilst that's running, that's what you're doing on your site. You're also thinking about, well, how can I make these units legally secure. So that habitat management plan and that DEFRA calculation, who's going to sign off on it and who's going to make sure that I'm compliant? And this is the kind of big gap out there in the market at the moment, is everyone's talking about having lots of units, but very few have been legally secured, which is an absolutely crucial criteria before you list them on the National Register. So if you don't mind just clicking there, perfect. So the kind of two phases, although they're not quick phases, are legally securing the units and listing them on the register. And to list them on the register, they need to be legally secured. And you can legally secure your units through one of two ways. One is through a Section 106, which all the developers who watch this will be well aware of as a mechanism. It's a development. It's a well-known kind of clause or piece of legislation in the development that's been kind of retrofit for habitat banking. And what it does is ultimately that what we're doing with our local council here is signing a Section 106 on our habitat bank so that that is legally secured for the next 30 years, or from the date we first started doing our habitat interventions. And that means it's protected, it's safe. We have to comply with whatever is in the Section 106, and that's all good, and that's great, and that's what we'll have here at Boothby. But ultimately, is a challenge for a lot of councils around the country. So that's probably holding up a few of these different habitat banks, I would say, elsewhere. The second option is through signing a conservation covenant with a formal responsible body. And so a few people have signed up to become a responsible body, and they're being vetted by DEFRA at the moment. And it will function in the same way. They will be watching over us and making sure we comply with the legal agreement that we have signed between us and our conservation covenant. And I've got the Pinson Masons logo there. They're our lawyers who've been helping us. They've done a load of BNG and natural capital based work. And so we've been in the lucky position that we've been working on our 106 for a long time. And we are also investigating conservation covenants for our new sites as a potential option. And so once that's all wrapped up, you've got your habitat management plan, you've done your baseline, you've completed your DEFRA metrics signed off by a qualified ecologist, and you've started working on your habitat bank. You've legally secured those units. You're finally in a position to list them on the National Register. And so that National Register will be key, because it will come with specific ID numbers for units for developers to then use in their biodiversity game plans before they start their development. Now, I think the first site went on to the register yesterday. It's a 3-hectare site in Exeter. I don't know whose it is, but it's the first one. So you can see there's a very kind of, ours is basically being vetted and is ready to hopefully be put on the next few weeks. But DEFRA are vetting every single habitat bank that goes on and making sure everyone has got their legal stuff set up nicely. So I'll just go through each of these really briefly with a picture each of these things, just so you get a flavour for what they look like. That's our habitat baseline. So everything in orange striped or orange dots is arable land. And so that will go, all of that data will go into the DEFRA metric, the statutory DEFRA metric that ultimately we combine the developer metric and the offsite metric to make sure everyone's showing the appropriate net gain they need to. Next one, please, Ian. Then you design your habitat management plans. So you can see, again, those orange stripy fields, that's the habitat baseline. And you can see them drifting towards ponds and meadows and purpley scrub. And then we've done some nice animations and types of plants that you do. So that's part of a kind of 30-page document that we have submitted as part of our S106. And then you start the work. So if you just do one click in, that is our pond creation that we did last year. So you can see that transition from a very low baseline to a series of wetlands and ponds. And on the right-hand side, that's us spreading green hay full of wildflowers across an ex-arable field. So we've started our habitat creation. That's the moment we start banking it from, and that will be in our S106 as well. Next one, Ian. And then the legally secured stuff, I've covered it pretty well, so we can probably move on. So yeah, doing units with Nattergal and therefore doing them with BioUnits UK. basically, I just wanted to stress the fact that, we're being led by data, ecology, and understanding from NEP. Everything's legally secured, and we're going to be taking things forward for 30 plus years. So I think that's the final slide there, Ian. You just
amazing. That's really, really
great.
yeah,
and this is a transition. This is NEP over 20 years, which I always find amazing because it looks like a mangrove swamp in South America or something. But it's West Sussex, and it was an arable farm on really rubbish soils 20 years ago, and then through natural colonization and natural processes has turned into this sort of biodiverse wonderland.